In this video, we are exploring some of the different decimal types, data types that are available in C#, and also a term called casting, which is converting one data type to another. And so in past videos, we've seen the fact that we have to create in order to create a variable, we need to define ahead of time what data type we're going to be creating. I'm going to call this one double, and I'm going to call this bank balance. And I'm going to give it a value of 191.66, just for no particular good reason. It seems like a good thing to do. All right, so double is the default decimal value or the default data type for decimals in C#. There is also a data type for decimals called float, which can be used. I'm going to use float weekly budget and leave it blank for the moment. Float takes up less space in memory. It's a smaller data type in memory than double, so it has less precision, but it is not the default of C#. And so even though it takes up not as much memory, it's not as, quote, precise. Let's say the weekly budget was, I don't know what this average is, 91.75. I don't know what it would be, but let's pretend like that's what it is. So if I try to assign a value when I initialize the variable, when I create the variable and give it a value immediately, notice I get this little red squiggly line, and you might be saying, well, yeah, but it's a decimal, so why is there an error? Because if you are declaring or initializing a variable with a value, at the time you initialize that variable, the assumption right now for C# is that this is a double value. But we're trying to put it into a float. And so you can see here in the error message, it's trying to let you know, use an F suffix to create a literal of this type. In other words, I can either put in an F, or now it's working, or a capital F. Either way, but what we're saying is we're intentionally don't want this to be a double. We want it to be a float. So if you initialize a literal value at the time that you create this variable, you have to give it an F, or a small case or an uppercase, doesn't matter. But I'm not initializing a value at this time, so I'm going to leave it this way, and I'm good so far. I don't have any red squiggly lines. So now let's create a value for a weekly budget. So I'm going to say a weekly budget is equal to the bank balance divided by 4. And in fact, I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to create a constant. Constant week equals to 4. All right, and so that way I can, capitals, these should all be capitals. So let's do, I don't know why that helped me out there. All right, please don't help me. Oh, constant, it needs to be a int. There we go. So now I can do this. Okay, so constants then are variables that we can create, that we can use that variable anywhere throughout the code, but we can't change that value once we've created it. So constant says this is a constant. We're creating an int. By convention, all of our variable names that are constants are going to be capitalized. And so anywhere I put the word week throughout my code, the value 4 is going to be used. And this is handy in case I ever want to change that value. I can just change it here instead of anywhere else, everywhere else in my code. So constants are nice to have, but now I can't change, like this. I see that we've got a little error here, and I do know the reason why, but I have two things going on at once. So let's finish this idea of constant. So now if I try to change week equal to 7, notice I'm getting an error message. The compiler says, it's the constant. Once you create it, you have to, as you create it, you're going to give it a name, you're going to give it a value, and you can't change it anywhere again in your code. Okay, so we've got rid of that, but I wanted to show you the idea of a constant anyway. All right, so now we've got this other error message. What is going on now? Well, it says it can't implicitly convert type double to a float. In other words, when this calculation is completed, we have a double divided by an int. Turns out it's going to return a double. But I'm trying to put that into a float, and it's saying, well, double is bigger It takes up more space in memory. It's a larger number that you've allocated that can't fit into a float, so it doesn't know what to do. Well, you and I, because we're the programmers, know that, well, if you do a bank balance divided by week, it's not going to be so big that it can't actually fit into a float. So we can do what's called casting. In other words, I'm going to say, by using parentheses, get rid of my space here, by using parentheses and the word float, what I'm suggesting to the compiler, I'm telling the compiler is, yes, I appreciate that this is going to return a double, but in my mind, I know that that can be converted safely to a float. So please change it to a float and then put that value into weekly budget. So now if we print out, or wrong language there, right line, let's right line weekly budget, put our mandatory semicolon there, and we run that. Let's do debug and start without debugging. We do get a value, 47.915. Fantastic. All right, so now let's take this a step further just to bring the point home. I'm going to create a integer called dollars, and I want to put in weekly budget. Again, the error message, and the error message is saying, well, you've got a float that you've defined weekly budget as a float, and now you're trying to put it into an integer. And I'm saying, yeah, I know that. I meant to do that. So let's cast the value to an integer and then put that into dollars. Are we potentially losing data there? Sure. But as a programmer, that's a choice that I decided for whatever reason. And the reason in this case is because I'm trying to demonstrate an example. I'm okay with that loss of data. Go ahead and cast it into an integer and put that into dollars. So now let's run that and look at our two values. And you'll see that it did in fact convert the 47.915 into an integer, but notice there's no rounding involved. It simply truncated it. So we did a cast so that our data types all matched, and I got rid of those red squiggly lines, but it does not, this casting does not round anything. It just simply says, well, you want an integer from a float? Okay, fine. I will just truncate all those decimal values. So what we tried to establish in this video is several concepts. One is we get the idea of what a constant should look like. We've seen that we've got two different types of decimals. We've got a double, which is the default for C#. We've got a float, which takes up less space. It's less precise. It uses less decimals, but it's still a possibility. So if we want to convert something from a larger value to a smaller value, it can't, the compiler can't do it automatically, so we might do what's casting that says, yes, I appreciate, you think you can't do it, but in this case I want you to, I kind of want to force the issue and go ahead and convert it into the lesser sized memory variable that I'm trying to put you into. And so we converted our double outcome into a float so that we could successfully put it into this particular variable. And then we converted or cast that decimal into an integer, losing our decimals. Remember, it truncates and not rounds, and ultimately ended up creating a dollar amount. So hopefully that helps solidify the differences in decimal data types.